Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Inspire Health Podcast. Now, before we get into Paul Selig's episode, the question that's come up from people is around immunity. Now, this is not an uncommon question at this time. Everybody's been asking about immunity, and immunity is a complex piece of this bigger overall puzzle. Mostly when a lot of other things are on track, then your immune system is naturally quite strong. So I've gone into this in quite detail in the past here. So episodes you might want to check out are episode 53, where I talk about tips for healthy and stress-free kids. I did that one. And then earlier on, I believe in July, I did an episode on mastering immunity. And there was another episode earlier on in the summer too on building resilience. There's also another episode I did with immunity with Dr. Jaffe. So just scroll through, find those episodes, and they will break down the bigger picture in great detail. Now, outside of that, and those are all the things that we look at to try and build overall abundance of health and wellness in our bodies, there are some key things that you can do. And I've talked before in the past about some of the key nutrients that are important to take, and especially since everything happened about 6 months back. Some of the big nutrients that a lot of people are taking are their vitamin C, their vitamin D, their zinc. These are all powerful nutrients essential for healthy immunity. Currently at the moment, myself and my family take the Organifi Immunity. It's a delicious blend, a drink mix. I used to take a general vitamin C powder, but I use the Organifi Immunity now. It's the same type of idea. It's a powder, but it's got 500% of your daily vitamin C needs, in addition to the bioavailable zinc and the vitamin D3 that we also need. So it's got a mix of all of those, and then on top of it, it's got some of the superfoods. So it's got the reishi extract, the beta-glucans from the reishi mushroom. Reishi is a powerful immune modulator. Immune modulators basically mean that they help the immune system respond properly, so preventing this overstimulating of the immune system, which often can happen, and often happens with allergies too. A lot of times allergies cause an overreaction of the immune system. So we use things like beta-glucan from reishi mushroom and others to try to modulate the way that the immune system runs. It's also got acerola cherry, which is standardized to about 30% of the vitamin C, which is a powerful natural food source of vitamin C. And as well, it has olive leaf extract. And if you haven't heard of olive leaf extracts are really potent, powerful herb from ancient Egypt that has very strong antiviral, antifungal, and antimicrobial properties. So very important one that can be added in. So it's nice when you can get a formula that contains a lot of these things together in a synergistic way that can just support your immune system, especially as we roll into fall. So if you haven't yet, head on down to the Organifi website at www.organifi.com/inspire. That's www.organifi.com/inspire for 15% off your order. And check out their other products. They've got the Organifi Immunity. They've got the Organifi Green Juice that I talked about yesterday that I really, really love. They've got this delicious Organifi Red Juice as well that's more like a berry blend, kind of similar to the green drink, but a berry blend. They've got Organifi Balance, which is a probiotic formula, as well as Organifi Gold, which is a sleep formula that's a really tasty tea that they can do at nighttime. It's almost like a chocolate flavored tea that we enjoy sometimes too before bed. All right, everybody, get ready and enjoy the episode coming up with Paul Selig.
Welcome to the Inspire Health Podcast. Your life is about to get a whole lot better. Have you ever felt like you tried everything and yet still couldn't find the answers or the solutions that you were seeking? Whether you're dealing with chronic illness, physical or emotional pain, I want you to know that your body is the most sophisticated machine on planet Earth. Your body holds unfathomable wisdom. Trust in it and learn from it. Know that there are answers and there are solutions to your specific health challenges. And we will be uncovering all of them here on the Inspire Health Podcast. I'm so excited to be a part of your healing journey. Your transformation starts now.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Inspire Health Podcast. Today's guest is Paul Selig. He is considered one of the most foremost spiritual channels working today. In his breakthrough works of channeled literature, I Am the Word, The Book of Love and Creation, The Book of Knowing and Worth,
the Book of Mastery, the Book of Truth, the Book of Freedom, and Beyond the Known Realization. Author and medium Paul Selig has recorded an extraordinary program for personal and planetary evolution as humankind awakens to its own divine nature. Paul was born in New York City and received his master's degree from Yale. A spiritual experience in 1987 left him clairvoyant. As a way to gain a context for what he was beginning to experience, he studied a form of energy healing and began to hear for his clients. Described as a medium for the living, Paul has the unique ability to step into and become the people his clients ask about, often taking on their personalities and physical characteristics as he hears them telepathically. Paul's work is widely featured in a variety of media, including ABC News Nightline, Fox News, the biography channel series The Unexplained, Gaiam TV's Beyond Belief, and the documentary film PGS, Your Personal Guidance System. He has appeared on numerous radio shows and podcasts, including Coast to Coast AM and Bob Olson's Afterlife TV. Paul, real pleasure having you on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
Now, Paul, I've come across your work in the past and recently reading your newest book, Alchemy. Okay.
Mhm.
And if you haven't had a chance to pick it up, go and take a look for it. What I really love about your work, and some of the work I've read from other channels as well, is it just resonates with a certain level of inner truth, and you just feel it. So
Mhm.
and it's sort of this difference between bypassing some of the logical mind and just feeling something that feels truthful to you. And
Mhm.
this is some of the stuff that I'm really finding fascinating, especially now more than ever. I feel like this kind of work is stuff that people need to pay attention to and listen to. And if they aren't familiar with how it works to channel a
Mhm.
text like this, I want to go through some of that with you. But I feel like if people can just open up to some of it and experience what the words feel like inside of them, it
Mhm.
can be very transformational. So, Paul, can you share your story as far as how you became a channel for spirit and the journey through this transformation and what it's actually like for you?
This is nothing that I planned. I wasn't somebody who necessarily even believed in channeling. I think I'd read half of a Seth book when I was a graduate student and thought it was really interesting, but put it aside. But I wasn't somebody, I was raised sort of an atheist. I wasn't, a likely candidate for this kind of work. When I was 25, I was about a year out of Yale and I was having this hot career as a playwright. Things were happening very quickly. I thought I'd gotten everything that I wanted and I was a mess. It was really very simple. So, everything that I thought would make me okay in the world didn't work. And I began looking for something more really out of necessity, not because I thought it would be nice to get a spiritual life, but it happened. And, my process of opening up as a channel, it's really been a process. When I was 25, I started praying for the first time, and I actually heard a voice telling me to get my act together and how to do it. And that really threw me, but I listened to it, and it did change my life. And in those days, I think for my guides or whatever speaks to me to get through must have taken an enormous amount of effort because I was pretty resistant and pretty dense. But I had an experience at 25. I went up to the roof of this building that I lived in Manhattan at the time. I heard people were going to be waking up on this thing, the date of this thing they call the harmonic convergence. And I just thought, if there is a God, and I thought maybe, possibly there was at this moment, why would it want to say no? That was my thinking. Why would it want to say no? So I went up in great expectation and really with great innocence to try to teach myself how to meditate. Somebody had given me a crystal, somebody gave me a mantra. I thought you needed the props to do this stuff. But I ended up having an experience of energy. And, it turned out that the mantra that somebody gave me was a Kundalini mantra. I didn't know what Kundalini was, but it was an experience of energy just pushing up, 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 and out through the top of my head. It left me sort of flowing up this energy up on the roof. I always say, for all I know, I was hyperventilating. I mean, there may be a perfectly logical explanation for what happened, but for me, it felt as if it came in response. It was extraordinarily physical. There was no way to deny what was happening. And I started seeing little lights around people after that. These little fireflies started going off around people. So, I mean, I'd heard a voice, I felt energy, I was seeing lights. I mean, my world was just getting turned upside down. And somebody sent me to somebody who did energy healing to get a context in what I was going through. And then I got the courage a couple of years later to study myself. And I was volunteering in a center for people that were living, and really in those days, dying from AIDS. It was the height of the epidemic in New York. The people were just dying in months. But it was something that I could do. So I found that when I had my hands on people's bodies, I began to hear things for them. So if I had my hand on your chest and I heard the name Arthur, I learned to say, "Who's Arthur?" And you'd say, "My father, my brother, my best friend," whatever. And as I kept getting the confirmation, I began to trust a little bit that I was getting information that was accurate. And I started a group that met in my apartment, and it met for about 18 years. And I wasn't planning to channel there. I was just planning to do the energy work that my teacher had taught me. And the very first class, I started getting instruction. So this went on for a very long time. I was an academic. I had a career teaching for years. I taught at NYU and ran a graduate program at a small college in Vermont. And I wasn't looking to be known for this, but in 2009, yeah, the guides started dictating whole books through me. And that's what changed everything. And the books were printed. And then I got, sort of outed as a channel. I wasn't looking to be known for this. It still is a little uncomfortable for me, because I don't understand what I do. I don't claim to be enlightened. I'm not a spiritual teacher or guru. I show up in my life as best I can, like everybody else. But this has been a very consistent process. And the guides have now dictated. I just finished the ninth book dictation last month, or last September. So the process is I sit in a chair, I close my eyes, I hear one phrase repeated incessantly. The moment I can speak the phrase aloud, and it may be something as simple as, "We need to speak to you about," I'll say that, and then everything else just pours out right on top of it. And then they don't stop until they're done with the lecture. So that's that work, and that's been the process, and that's what it is now. And now it's what I do. Surprising to me, surprising to most of my old friends who thought that this was just the nuttiest thing that could happen. And perhaps it was. I don't seek to convince anybody. It's not my job.
Well, I think that's also part of what I feel is really valuable with even the message that seems to be coming through. I don't feel like there's no motive on trying to make people understand, or it's basically, here's the information, and there's free choice with all of it. So and I think that's also why it seems to be received quite easily, is because you don't feel any pressure around anything like that.
Well, the guides I work with don't tell people what to do. I wish they'd tell me what to do. And they don't, But I get guidance, but I'm not told what to do. And, it is what it is. It's a teaching, And I was a good teacher when I was a college teacher. I enjoyed the hell out of it. These guys are better than I ever was. They have far more patience. And they're literally willing to unpack an idea again and again until it's able to be really comprehended or utilized in some way. So I'm grateful for that. And, that's just what it is. I don't think it's, I always have to say, I don't think of myself as being that special at all. I just think this odd thing that I do, and it stays in that envelope for me. This is this odd thing that I do, that I've developed facility with, and I've been worked with to do that over years. I was developed by the guides, really, that I worked with, through all those evenings in my apartment, 18 years. People used to put $10 in a basket. I mean, that was it. I'd buy pizza afterwards, or, that was it. So anyway.
When you mentioned guides, I understand the concept of guides and angels and different things. Do you have any idea of where that's coming from, or when you even say guides, what that means?
Yeah, the only reason I call them the guides is my ex years ago, when my ex found out I could do this, used to say, "Ask the guides this, ask the guides that." So that's how they have to be called, the guides. No other reason. They say that they're teachers. There's a name that they've used. for themselves as a collective. And I understand that the name has lineage, but I'm not really caught up in the identity of that. I hear. I'm primarily clairaudient and clairsentient. I feel the energy.
Hmm.
The visual information comes as backup for me. It's not my first gift. It sort of shows up as supporting evidence. The one that I've seen visually, I've seen in meditation under hypnosis, and he's constant as he shows up the same way each time, with different qualities. And I recognize him, but mostly what I recognize, because this is a collective, they use the we, they
Hmm.
speak in we, and at times you can hear the differentiation in the, in the way the language is used. Um, but I don't know. I don't remember what I was saying. So yeah, so the we is there to teach. It's really about the information, and they teach in energetic attunements, which are usually quite palpable for people, which is what I like about the books. And when they do workshops, or I show up and they speak through me in the workshops, people can feel the energy. I mean, there's all this
Hmm.
phenomena attached to this stuff at this point, which I like because it becomes provable.
Right.
I'm still enough of a skeptic that if somebody says, well, there's somebody standing behind you, I go, okay, well, that's nice. And that somebody's putting a hand on your forehead and you go, bang, you go, what the hell was that? And you do that in a room with 100 people and everybody's getting it. You're in a collective field of shared phenomena, which is, I think, quite beautiful.
Hmm.
It's why I did the group in my apartment for so long. I used to get high on the energy. I was the only way I got high. So I figured, why not? At least this is good stuff. So that's it.
Well, and you've been working with them for like 2 decades now or so, or
Mm-hmm.
longer than that probably.
Longer. Yeah.
And before we get into some of the specific questions I have, what is sort of the overall kind of theme that the guide's message is really trying to bring forth to humankind, more or less?
I suppose how I would answer that would be depending on the day that I was asked and what I'm thinking about the teachings. They're speaking about the realization, which is, and they say realization and knowing are interchangeable words, at least as they use them, the realization of the true self. And they say that the true self is the aspect of the creator that seeks to be realized in form. It's the divine as who you are. And it works and operates beyond the construct of personality, which is what we've gotten sort of stuck in and moored in. There's nothing wrong with it. We all have them. But we tend to mistake who we are for the ideas that we've amassed around that identity. So I can say I'm a man in my 50s. I'm, living in this weird little cottage on Maui because COVID happened in New York and I didn't get to go home when I thought I would. All these odd things. They're things that I experience, ways of knowing myself, but they're not truly who I am. So they're teaching us how to align at a higher level to this truth and then begin to operate from there. At that level of vibration, they say, we call to us that which is of like accord, vibrational accord. So they say we're living here in an octave of vibration, low notes and high notes, everything's in octaves and tone. And what they're doing is they're transposing the music or the tone that we are to operate, they say, in the octave above, the octave beyond. And that has a resonant field. And then you begin to have a very different experience at that level. And you're also supporting the lifting of what you encounter to that field. So it's how the world is changed. They say at this level, you become the doorway to what they call the upper room or the higher octave, which they call Christ mind, the realization of the divine as all things.
Mhm.
So that wasn't the elevator speech. It was a little longer, but that's the gist of it.
No, I love that, and it makes sense to other teachings that I've heard in the
Mm-hmm.
past. I remember working with Dr. Stephen Hawkins before, and he would talk in a very similar way.
Huh.
It wasn't a channel, but he would talk about in a very similar way that same idea that it's like when people get caught up in wanting to change the world, it sort of always comes back to our individual self. It's like the more that we can do and raise our own level of consciousness, that raises the
Mm-hmm.
level of the sea, he would say. So
Absolutely.
I think one thing I'd like to break down a little bit is when we talk about the divine self versus the small self. I feel like
Mm-hmm.
sometimes this gets
Yeah.
confusing for people, but
what is the divine self? And I guess even more importantly is, how do we know when we are really operating from the divine self versus the smaller self?
I'm still operating as my small self the bulk of the time. I have access to the other and I know the difference. And the real difference is there's no fear. You're operating beyond fear. You're not catalyzed by fear. So the guides would say, the guides have defined the Christ, and they don't talk about Christ in terms of personage. They talk about Christ as the seed of the divine that seeks expression, that seeks to flower as and through its creation. So that's the idea of the divine as you. You can't make yourself holy, you already are. But what you have done, and we've all done, is deny that. They say the denial of the divine is really our only problem. If we could get past that, everything would shift, because we'd have a very different experience of ourselves and of everybody else. But we're so entrenched in all of this information that's so reductive to our true nature. You're as good as your last job. If your marriage fails, you're a failure. If you lose your job, who are you? If you're not beautiful, by traditional standards, you're unlovable. All this crap that we've amassed and we operate in exchange with. This becomes currency. Who's the best looking one at the party, and who's the one you should meet to get what you want? All that stuff. That's all small self. The guides say the true self could care less what anybody else thinks of him or her, and that's not an arrogance. That's just, she is not looking for that reflection, doesn't require it, because he, she, it knows who it is, regardless of outcome or circumstance. So they also call it the monad, which I guess is, I don't even know the definition of monad probably correctly, but I've understood it to be the piece of the whole that expresses the whole. So that's the seed that seeks expression. So part of the work of the guides, much of the work of the guides, is releasing that which has stood in the way of this expression, which is primarily fear and all of its creations. It's really not that complicated. So essentially, I suspect what they're saying is that the divine self seeks to become itself as and through everything. And that's its job, is realization, and will do so when it is activated and that permission has been granted, because we have free will. We get to choose. They don't override free will, at least not with me. But if I say I'm going to go on this ride, I'm on this ride, and this is going to be a crazy ride, because it means I'm going to have to encounter things about myself and my world that I'd much prefer not to see, because I don't get to sit anymore in the comfort of the old. We're in a very interesting time now where the old has sort of been taken from us, all of us collectively, and we're going, what the hell is this?
Mm-hmm.
But then it becomes opportunity to know ourselves beyond the structures that we've endowed with all this power, and our sense of self and our self-importance or our weakness or whatever that might be. So I don't know that I've answered your questions, but the true self knows, the guides say, and the small self thinks. And there's nothing wrong with thinking. There's a good place. But when you're in your knowing, and it's what you said about your reading of the books, you sort of know it's true. And that's my feeling too. The woman who channeled Course in Miracles, who was also an academic years ago, and I never read that, interestingly. I tried it when I was very young, in my 30s, early 30s, and just couldn't, it didn't take for me, but I know people love it. But Helen Schuckman was her name. And when she was asked about her work, she said, I don't believe it, but I know it's true. And that's like the best thing I've ever heard about channeling. I agree completely.
Yeah, I did the Course in Miracles with my wife a couple of times in the past, and in your work, or the work that you channel through, resonates in a very similar frequency of truth for me. You just read it, and even if I'm not at a place where I can honestly say I can live it completely, but it's like I know that it viscerally feels right to me. And when you were mentioning about small self usually focuses with fear, or lives from a place of fear, versus divine self where fear is pretty much absent. And I remember reading in one of the books too, I think you had actually said that, well, I think that one of the messages that came through was that when you are acting from the divine self, fear no longer exists, or fear is not there anymore. And it just makes me think, like, does anybody live in the divine self at this point? I feel like right now it's like everybody is functioning from a place of fear a lot of times. Can we go into functioning from the divine self and then we
Yeah,
get pulled back out of it and we sort
yeah,
of
yeah,
do
yeah, yeah,
this?
yeah, yeah. That's the dance. The book Alchemy that just came out is the one that really addresses this. The book that they've dictated since then, and that was just in the last few months, that's all about operating from the upper room as your basis, as your foundation, and the experience of being there. But the challenge, I mean, when they dictated this last book, Alchemy, I just thought I was gonna lose it. I've never been through anything like that in my life. Um, because it really is a little bit like being turned inside out, or having, held upside down and having your pockets opened up and all the crap that you've amassed
Hmm.
starts to fly all over the place. And I kind of think some days that what we're experiencing collectively is the equivalent of this. That, the guides I work with said in a lecture a couple of weeks ago, you think your world is being turned upside down, but in fact it's being righted. And you've been operating in this level of illusion for so long you don't even know it. So basically the stuff is going to start flying for a while, but it's
Hmm.
part of a process. It's part of a process that I hope that they say finally is beneficial, because I'm not enjoying this, but I am having a very unique experience of these times. The guides have been talking about this stuff for the last 4 years nonstop. And it's like, okay, this is it. This is what they've been talking about. I get it. Okay. So it becomes opportunity. And, the guides say, and it's, you really can't be, a victim and a master at the same time. And all that really means is you can look at your experiences as opportunities for growth and learning, even if it's nothing that we would have chosen or
Hmm.
wanted. And that's this whole process of shifting.
Well, and I was curious about that. So from your guide's perspective, when they look at what's going on in the world today,
Hmm.
then that would be a result then of a collective vibration that we as a populace have been putting out for a long time. And
Hmm.
I'm assuming, and then is it just that we've kind of actually created the world at a certain point right now that is now reflecting back certain lessons to us that is
Yeah.
within our will to be able to free choice, make choices now to, like you said, almost write it, to do something very different.
That's what I've heard. And I mean, they've talked about this in a lot of different ways, and I'm going to try to get it right, and I might not get it right. But what the guides say is everything that you see, anything that anybody sees, you're in vibrational accord with. Nothing exists beyond that level of agreement. People talk about the law of attraction, and I'm going to get this, I'm going to get that. What we don't see is that we, at the level of the singular and the plural, have created this entire thing. So everything that we see, we're in vibrational accord to. Doesn't mean we made it happen, but they say ACCORD, or they'll say ACHORD, is on a piano, which means in tonal resonance. So if that's the case, the consciousness that the individual and the collective holds informs everything we see. And most of how we see everything seems to be predetermined by what we've been taught, or what we've been taught to expect or believe. What they're teaching us now, if I understand it, is to move beyond those old expectations of what should be, to see what is always true. They say what is true is always true. So they speak of the inherent divine. They say it really simply: what you damn damns you back.
Hmm.
What you bless blesses you in return. So we're running around damning everything and everyone and ourselves and each other, and that's the world we operate in. When we begin to claim our inherent divinity, they say there's real accountability and responsibility. They say you can't be the light and hold another in darkness. It's not true. It's impossible. The light can't hold anything in darkness. But you can find a religious structure that will tell you to do this, or factions of this or that that would, enjoy the fight. So I don't understand, or I don't get from them that anything that we see can't be transformed, but it's not going to be transformed at the level of consciousness that initially created it. And the guides have said in all their books for the last number of years, everything, the action of fear is to claim more fear. It's the simplest teaching. Every choice we make in fear creates more fear. They've also said, fear doesn't know how to learn, it just knows how to replicate. It's a bit like cancer. It just grows and grows and grows. It doesn't gain in wisdom. But we can, because we can lift above it and then transform it by bringing the light to what is so deeply entrenched and held in shadow. So that's what I understand the teaching to be in the times. They said in the very first book, I Am the Word, which was channeled in 2009, they said humanity is at a time of reckoning, and a reckoning is a facing of oneself and all of one's creations. And they also said, because they rarely speak about countries or politics, but they did say in that book that this country's opportunity was to become a model for great change, to move away from the idea of becoming the dominator in a world stage. And that if we didn't do that, if we didn't use it as a model for change and to become humble in some ways to the possibility of other ways of being in the world, we might not make it. So, and I've heard, and this is encouraging from the guides, they've said humanity's decided to make it. We're all going to make it. There's been a higher collective agreement to move forward as a species. And this is the process that we're beginning to engage in. It's just not very polite. It's not necessarily pretty, but that's it.
Yeah, and that's the message that I've heard from others as well, is that we are already going to be making it. It's almost an agreement that's been set up. And that gives me a lot of solace, given the craziness that we're still kind of in the midst of right at the moment. But it sort of gives a light to the end of the tunnel, I think. And I guess part of it is like, if we can connect to the feeling of that light, then we are going to be playing our role and maybe assisting and moving in that direction.
Yeah. The guides work with these attunements, and one of the attunements, and they say these things are all claimed at the level of the true self, not the personality. The true self, they say, knows who it is, knows what it is, knows how it serves. So the invocation of that, I know who I am in truth, I know what I am in truth, I know how I serve in truth, supports one in the alignment of the claim. And they say how one serves is how one is most fully expressed as the true self. We live in a culture where people think that's got to be about their career or what they do. And it can be augmented by that, but I don't think that that's what the guys are teaching at all. They're talking about the resonant field that you hold and the level of consciousness you align to, which will then transform what you encounter. And that's true service. So I think that there's great opportunity for everyone now, but I think we can't do that when we get mired in blame. Because then we're just back in the game of separation. And they do talk about moving out of the singular to the collective. God is all things, not just the things you like. And if you let God be whatever you want it to be, but the energy that supports all manifestation is all things, not just the pretty things or the things that you agree with or the people that you would approve of.
That concept makes sense to me when I first came across that as well. And I feel like that's a hard pill for a lot of people to swallow, is the idea that God is all things. So God is the stuff that you despise, the awful stuff, as well as all of the stuff that's the beauty and whatnot. And I guess, how do people work with that? Like, when we see some of the just atrocities and you're sort of like, that's part of God, how does that make sense for people?
It's a big teaching. I don't know that I can do it here. I think the thing is, you have to look at the substance, not how the thing presents, but the energy that is manifest as it. So, and you can say, well, a gun is a terrible thing, but a gun is really, metal and lead and all this stuff that's been shaped, that is used in a certain way. It's the intent behind the gun and how the gun is used that makes it a weapon. You can use a piece of wood to build a house or to club somebody to death with it. So in some ways, what they invite us to do, I think, is to pull back and release the meaning things have been held by, and then bring it back to the source of all things. And that way it can be changed. In no way are the guides saying that it's acceptable to do harm. They say again and again, we're accountable to all of our actions, all of our creations. That's ours. You make it, it's yours. You're bound to it until you transform it. And I'll give you this story. It may help to understand it. I was channeling in Vancouver. No, where was I? I was in Calgary, Alberta, for a weekend. And I did my Saturday, and then I woke up Sunday morning and I was about to go teach, and I checked my email. And there was the shooting at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando. It happened overnight, and all these men were killed. Men, women, everybody was killed. It was a mess. It was the biggest at the time, mass murder in the country. And I had to go teach. I had to go channel. And the guys delivered a lecture 5 minutes later called How to Deal with an Atrocity, which is actually up on YouTube. We actually got that out within 24 hours. There's another lecture that they channeled called Great Change that was dictated, I think, 3 or 4 days before the 2016 election, which was highly prescient. So they're pretty much on top of this stuff. People tend to think that you're approving of things when you don't seek punishment. The guides talk about re-knowing anything. I suppose it's as simple as condemn the sin and not the sinner. I think that's the easy way to understand the idea behind this. But they say, God must be in all things or can be nowhere at all. And they said, and I said, well, what about the darkness? And they said, well, even the darkness is of God. It just doesn't know it. It's operating in ignorance of its inherent divinity, which is why it can be transformed by the light. It's real simple.
And I think that's how I've come across it in past too, is ignorance. I think that's actually not less about good and evil, but about ignorance is sort of when we consider like what we would think of as dark, like they don't know better.
Yeah, the guides don't really talk about good and evil. They've mentioned it, and maybe they'll get to it in a big way. I don't think that they're disclaiming that, but that's not how they teach it. They teach about high and low and gradations, high notes and low tones, high notes. So you can have the very low. It's part of the tapestry, but they say any note can be played in a higher octave. And this whole process of transposition and lifting things, I suppose is about really re-knowing it in a higher way. But when something is reknown, they say it is transformed. In other words, it is transformed at its fundamental nature.
And when we talk about these frequencies or being in accord or in alignment with that, what can people, I know as humans we always want to do something, but it's sort of like, how do we connect to that better? What would be like practical ways that people can actually start to connect, to try to be a part of that higher frequency so that you can connect to that divine self more easily?
Well, the books the guides write are all energetic attunements. They work directly with the reader. I heard that in the very first book. They said, this isn't a book that you read so much as you experience. That was the book, I Am the Word. And when the reviews started coming in for the first book, nobody knew who I was. I was channeling in my living room in those days. Nobody knew me. There was no publicist. There was I think they gave me $5,000, for the first book. And I was thrilled because the guys had said it's going to be the first publisher who reads it. It won't even be submitted, and don't haggle. And I didn't, and it was perfect. And it was the right guy. It was the right publishing. It was perfect. But anyway, the first book came out and the reviews started coming in. And people were writing things like, I'm reading this book and my body is vibrating. I'm reading this book and I'm seeing auras. All of the phenomena began. And it's been the same with every book. So the books themselves are energetic transmissions that they say work directly with the reader, and that they actually are sort of mentoring the reader, the student of the work as they go through it. At one point they said, it was, I don't remember, maybe the third or the fourth book, they say, if you have a question when you're reading the book, ask the question and we'll answer it. And I said, well, how is that possible? And they said, well, we operate outside of time. So as we're dictating the book to Paul, we're also with the reader who's reading the book. And then all these people started writing and saying, I asked a question on the next page, it was answered again and again. And people often say, I'm reading the book for the second time. It's a completely different book. I've never read this before. So that's the stuff. I don't mean to be touting it. I'm not. I'm as surprised by this stuff as the reader, and I don't really read the books. I used to have to type up the transcripts. I don't anymore, thank God. It was brutal, but listening to my own voice, and it was awful for all those hours and hours and hours. Now somebody else can do it, and I'll proof the galleys, The new book I didn't even read. The new book they just finished. It's 300 pages. It's the first time I've done this. I turned it into my publisher, and I didn't read it. I haven't read the book. I think I corrected. I looked at the changes that the copy editor made, which were just where to put the commas, or if I misspoke a word, one of them. They're like things like, millennium, things like that. But I'll have to go back and check, because the rule with the books is we don't get to go back and fix them. There's no editing in the books at all. This is just how it came out of the mouth. That's what's in the book. This one, I didn't even read it. I'm going to wait. I can't. I'm so overloaded with this stuff. I can't tell you.
Oh,
Yeah.
I can imagine. Well, also, you've been doing it for enough now that there's probably so much just trust with what's coming through, and that's the message, and there's no point in trying to. It's almost like I think when people take texts, whether it's the Bible or something else, and then they try to understand it, and it's like you can only understand it. You can't understand it in the same way that it was ultimately delivered. So
Yeah.
then you're going to end up changing the message if you start to try and do too much yourself with it, possibly.
Well, I can't, I don't, because I don't get to go back and fix anything. That makes a big difference. It is what it is. But all of the books are dictated in front of audiences now. So, because there are no live groups while this was happening, some of the book was dictated in live stream lectures, and workshops that I was doing online, but I actually convened a group of 10 people. The guide said, get 10 people, or 9 or 10, and we'll do it for them, because there has to be an audience. I can't
Right.
do this in a room by myself. And I like that. They're public events.
Yeah. Yeah. A couple of questions, Paul, that I had
Mm,
was one around truth, and I think you'd mentioned a little bit about this, but this is a question I've got, is this concept of truth as far as, and I feel like this is what creates so much division, is that everybody's
mhm,
got a different concept of what is
yeah.
true. And is there an ultimate truth? And is there individual truth that is still valid depending on where people's individual level of consciousness is, that just is their truth, and you can't really convince them outside of it because that is their truth at that point in time? And is it important to still live by that truth at that point in time? Do you understand what I mean?
I totally understand it. Once or twice, the guides have used the phrase "your truth." And I was surprised, because for the longest time they have said that what is true is always true. The idea of personal truth is really opinion, and you're entitled to your opinion. But they say what is true is always true. So, no, the answer finally is no. The idea of personal truth is, this is what I say reality is. That's your right. Everybody's, I think, experience of reality is subjective. I think we'd have to agree on that. It's raining out here in Maui today. I think it's quite beautiful. Somebody else is saying, I was going to go to the beach. This sucks. My truth is it's a beautiful day. No, that's my opinion. My experience of the day can be beautiful. I think nobody's denying anybody's experience. But when somebody tries to mandate their truth, this is the way it is because it's what I say, then I think we get into contentiousness and confusion, because then you've got, sort of dueling versions of reality.
Hmm.
Now, I understand that. I've lived in a world where there was no such thing as God, and one in which there was. And I won't say that I'm an agnostic. I do believe, but my experience of union isn't what it's been at times, and knowing isn't always present at the same level. But I have to say, when that happened for me, it was like the equivalent of being moved to another planet. The rules are different. Thoughts have power. That was totally new information for me. None of this was what I grew up with. And I have to say, my experience as a youth was just as valid as my experience now. I would
Hmm.
never make myself wrong for what I believed, but my subjective experience of being a young man, without a spiritual life and that level of recourse, I suspect is rather different than who I emerged as, as a result of the experiences I've had. So it's never about making somebody else wrong, but I do think that very often when I'm running a workshop and somebody raises their hand and says, well, my truth is, and the guides have been known to say, well, that's not your truth, that's your opinion. And that's fine.
Hmm.
Nothing wrong with having opinions. We all have them.
Okay. And the role then of feelings, like
Uh-huh.
even around the knowingness that we get, I'm trying to sometimes, to me, it often feels like when I get a sense of knowingness, I get a certain visceral reaction.
Yeah.
I get goosebumps, I feel it
deep inside my body, and I kind of
Hmm.
associate that with a certain sensation, feeling, even
Hmm.
emotion probably to
Hmm.
some
Hmm.
point. And when different people are experiencing different emotions
Hmm.
for the same types of events that are going on,
Hmm.
how do you discern then what's true and what's not true? It's something I've been questioning a little bit, as far as just what's really going on with that, and how much to trust our that feeling, how important it is
Hmm.
to reconnect to that feeling.
Listen, if something makes somebody uncomfortable, there's probably a decent reason for it. I think we're trustworthy at that level of experience. I know when I'm uncomfortable. I know when somebody's being rude to me. I know when I'm feeling frightened. I know these feelings. But most of my reactions, I'm guessing, I would say 85% of my reactions are born in historical data. I was a chubby gay kid who got bullied, so when I see a bully, I have a physical reaction to somebody being bullied. And that's my issue. Do you understand this? It comes with me. It's part of something that I'm accountable for, is my own reaction. Just because I have the experience doesn't mean that it's true necessarily. We've all, whoever's had
Hmm.
anybody who's ever thought they knew something to find out that they were mistaken has had these experiences. The one thing I do know is that when I know something, truly know it, there is never a question attached. When you know, there's never a question. You just know, you know. And the guides say, when the true self knows, what they actually mean is when you're operating at that level, and this is the other thing that's interesting, when you're in your knowing, when you know something truly, you're never afraid. And I think this is even true. Like if somebody gets a hard medical diagnosis, the diagnosis isn't what's frightening, it's what's going to happen next or
Hmm.
what could happen. It's all the projections. But in that moment, you're going, okay, I see. It's like somebody saying, okay, the marriage is over. Oh, that's not what's scary. It's what did I do? Will he or she leave? What's going to, all the
Yeah.
stuff. So I also understand that when one is in his or her knowing, one is required to act on that knowing. You're given the opportunity, and sometimes it's you don't do a damn thing because that's what you're being told to do. There's a rattlesnake. Maybe you should run. Maybe you should stand stock still. I don't know, but your knowing might. So I try to discern as best I can, and I don't always succeed when I'm acting in fear, because I try not to make choices based in fear. Because when I'm doing that, and fear holds a lot of disguises, pride and greed and all those things, that's all fear. Those are just manifest other masks fear wears. I try not to do that as best I can because I understand that the ramifications of doing that are going to be awful. And the guides say, look at any or every choice you ever made in fear and see what it got you, and you'll see pretty quickly it got you more fear. So they say you stop the trajectory by not acting on it. That becomes the opportunity. Right now, everybody's being incited to act in fear. That seems to be the moment we're in. And I think it's important, but I make a big distinction, and the guides make a big distinction between prudence and fear. And the guides say, if you go to the beach and there's a sign in the water that says sharks, probably best not to swim. That's not fear, that's prudence. If it's raining, wear an umbrella. If you're going to mess around, have safe sex. It's
Hmm.
it's practical. That's not fear based. It's
Yeah.
sort of basic self-preservation, which is not fear based. It's like wearing a coat in the winter. It's a good idea.
Right. Yeah, and I think it probably comes back to what what does that feel like inside your body it's almost like you could make two reasons as to not go down a dark alley at night. One because you're terrified of being mugged, and the other one because you care about yourself enough to not put yourself in harm's way.
Yeah, and I think it's not a bad choice. It's not a good idea to go skating on thin ice.
Right.
You can do it. You might fall through. That doesn't mean you're scared. It means you don't want to fall through. That's
Hmm.
pretty simple. I think it's not that hard to figure this stuff out. I think, and like before COVID, I was flying all over the place. I was, 3 times a month, I was doing a workshop someplace. And, you know, every time I think I'm down with this and I've moved beyond this and there's turbulence, I remember how frightened I actually are. I can't do a damn thing about it, but I'm grabbing the poor person in the seat next to me in terror. No, I was like, get me back in a taxi. I don't want to do this anymore. So, you know, that's my stuff. So I've not outgrown it yet. And the guides say the fear of death is one of the things we're all going to have to encounter eventually. You
Mm-hmm.
know, it's part of the whole game, you know, that it's a bad thing, when in
Yeah.
fact it's just a natural process that we're all going to go through, and that we are infinite.
Well, I think I remember being said once that for don't don't act until you're in alignment. So
Hmm.
if you're in a place of fear, then almost don't act until you can try to move out of that into a place of more alignment.
Hmm. I think it's helpful, and sometimes we just have to jump off the diving board.
Hmm.
You know, we just have to do it
And see
and
what
then see what
happens.
happens. Well, because we're going to learn from it no matter
Right.
what. And this is really about learning. You know, I've been here, I'm married for 6 months. I didn't plan to come here. Now I'm looking at buying a house here. It's crazy. I've never bought a house in my life. I have an apartment in New York sitting for me. I've never slept in it a night. I moved while I was here, you know. I mean, this is crazy. This is nuts. I'm scared out of my mind some days. But some days you have to say, okay, well, you're going to have this experience perhaps. And if the world ends, well, you've learned a big lesson. You know, you end up living in a paper bag on the highway. You've learned a lesson, and you know, people can learn through anything.
Yeah, I think it's a good way. I mean, really, it's the only real self-empowering way you can look at anything is, and you're taking total responsibility for your life when that happens. So,
Yeah, I agree.
just a question I wanted to ask a couple of things around healing, particularly, because this is
Hmm.
an area that I work with a lot. And I'm just curious around things like spontaneous healing. And a lot
Hmm.
of times, spontaneous healing often gets correlated with spiritual experiences are
Hmm.
very big changes in perspective or context for
Yeah.
people. And I just want to understand how much does that play into it? Like if people are dealing with a serious illness,
Hmm.
is there a higher likelihood of healing from something when you can connect into, say, a higher frequency, or when you can dramatically change beliefs or perspective? Like how does that play out and then create some change?
You know, I don't know what the physics are of anything. I really don't, and I expect that one day we'll all know this stuff. And, you know, when I heard that nurses were being trained in therapeutic touch, which was Dolores Krieger's healing modality, I thought this is really interesting. You know, there's some correlation, there's people are understanding. There are other ways to be healed. What I do believe is that nothing can be transformed until it's first seen as a possibility. It's really that simple. You know, and I think sometimes it's about learning to accept something that we prefer not to accept. Maybe that's the big miracle. You know, in 12-step land, you know, the second step was came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could, you know, restore us to sanity. Well, that's an enormous leap for some people, enormous. But nothing is changed until it's possible. The guides I work with say we're always ordering off of the menu that we believe we can order from. That's it. And if my menu says you're going to get sick and die, you know, or this can't be changed, the guides say, you know, when we say something can't be changed, we're actually operating in idolatry. We're making something stronger than the power of the divine. But the guides have spoken a lot about this because I question it a lot. And I've read for a lot of people. And I also think we also have great opportunity to learn, or others in our lives have great opportunity to learn through what we're experiencing. So I believe personally that the soul makes certain choices of things that it will learn through in a lifetime. And the idea that everything should be fixed or restored to what we think it should be, I think might be a little presumptuous, because who knows? You know, who knows what opportunity you may be providing your own growth or somebody else's for being where you are and going through what you're going through. So I don't know the answer to that. The book talks about it a lot. Alchemy talks about it. The book, most of the books do, because they're common questions. Do I believe that anything can be healed? I suppose I do, but I don't know if I think I mean that by our Western traditional means, or some of the more esoteric things. I think there's a lot we just don't know yet about what we're made up of. And the guides speak in terms of energy and tone,
Mm-hmm.
and they say it's a lot about re-seeing, re-knowing. It's not about spiritual bypassing. It's not about pretending things are okay. I remember when I was volunteering at that center many, many years ago, and there was a woman who came in to be worked with. And I don't do medical work. I'm not a doctor, but I had my hands on her and I could feel all the tumors in her body. They were just pushing through the skin. And I'd never felt anything like it. And she had decided not to go for any Western modalities since the beginning of her diagnosis. And I was thinking, I wish she had. I really wish she had. I think she might be here a while longer if she had, So it's not about woo-woo. I'm the first person to say, listen, if I break my leg, take me to the doctor. I want it set well. You can pray on it later. It's not going to hurt. It may help enormously. But I think, how we attend to anything is through the list of potentials that we think we can work with. I think it's a much bigger list than we know.
Yeah, I like the way you word that. That makes sense to me. It's almost like the more that we can just keep expanding that box that we've created around our life, we increase the possibilities for something that might be beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, in closing, because I want to be respectful of your time, any last words that the guides would have to offer as far as what people can do right now that would be most beneficial?
I'll see if I can do it. I can see if I can get them. I don't know what people should do. And the guides, they can, could, will, may. That's good. They never use should. So let me see what they want to say. I whisper and repeat when I hear, so it's a little
Yeah.
awkward. Like I say two things. They're saying we would like to say two things. They're saying you have great opportunity now to re-know who you are beyond the mask, or beyond the mask you've worn, or the identity of self, or the idea of self that believes itself to be separate, to be separate. You may say yes to this. You may say yes to this. I'm going to know myself beyond what I've known. I am willing to know myself beyond what I have known, which is my way. I am willing to choose in a higher way. I'm going to grow into my true self. I am willing to grow into my true nature. These simple claims will support anyone, will support anyone in a potential, in a new potential. We will say yes to you. We will say yes to you as you say yes to yourselves, as you say yes to yourselves, period. And they're saying period.
That's beautiful. Thank you very much. Paul, for people that would like to learn more about your work, where's the best place that we can send them? And
Sure.
as far as even if you're doing programs and whatnot,
Yeah.
where can people learn more about your work?
My website's paul@paulselig.com. I have an author page on Instagram, which lists my events, and Facebook as well. The website has the calendar. I do a monthly 5-day, intensive workshop, 2 hours a day. I think the next one's coming up in mid-October. There's a free or pay what you can thing coming up, I think, next week. And every Wednesday night, I'm channeling, and people can sign up for that too through the website.
Wonderful. I'll make sure that I've got all of the links in the show notes, and then we'll
Great.
make sure that everybody can get a hold of that information.
Mm-hmm.
And for people that haven't, check out Alchemy. It's amazing. I think all your books, after going through that one, I need to go back and now start to reread and read over some of the ones that I haven't had a chance to look at yet, so it all gets pulled together. But Paul, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for all the work you're doing. Very much appreciated.
Thanks for having me. Take care now.
You're welcome.
Well, that was awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to invest in your health and well-being. Since this podcast is brand new, reviews and subscribers are so vital for us to get off the ground and share this really important information. So if you found this information valuable, please post a review and subscribe to the podcast so you'll get our newest episodes. Also, if you know of someone who would benefit from this, please share it with them. You can also find us on Instagram at #InspireHealthPodcast. If you have a question that you'd like to be addressed, direct message me on Instagram or leave a comment on one of my posts. I would love to hear from you. And you can grab our show notes and free resources for each episode at inspirehealthpodcast.com. So be sure to go online and check it out.